You think your morning commute is rough? Try explaining to a screaming woman in a hazmat suit that looked suspiciously like a painter's overall and a mosquito net why her attempts to bludgeon several thousand buzzing residents of my backyard with a rusty garden rake were, shall we say, frowned upon. And that was before the state apiarist showed up, looking like he'd just stepped out of a bee-themed edition of GQ. The low hum was my alarm clock, a gentle vibration that seeped through the double-paned windows and into my consciousness. Not the jarring shriek of my phone, but the contented drone of 100,000 tiny wings stirring to life. It was Tuesday, late June, and the sun was just starting to paint the dew-kissed clover in the community green space a hazy gold. Coffee was brewing, smelling rich and promising, and I was just about to step onto my back porch and greet the girls. Yeah, I anthropomorphized my bees. Sue me. There was Beatrice IV, the reigning queen of Hive Alpha, a regal matriarch if ever there was one, and her fiercely dedicated daughters, flitting in and out of the meticulously crafted cedar boxes I'd positioned just along the edge of my property line. Life was good. The community garden, once a patchy affair of half-hearted tomato plants and suicidal zucchini, was now a riot of color and produce. Old Mr. Henderson, bless his green thumb, swore his prize-winning roses had never been so vibrant. Even Mrs. Gable, whose yappy Pomeranian usually terrorized the local squirrels, seemed a little less yappy. The bees, my buzzing little lodgers, were a miniature ecosystem of productivity, a tiny, winged engine driving a surprising amount of joy and bounty through our otherwise beige suburban existence. Most folks got it. They saw the plump blueberries, the overflowing window boxes, the general air of floral fecundity, and they nodded their approval. Most folks. Then there was Brenda. Brenda Henderson. No relation to nice Mr. Henderson, thankfully. The self-appointed guardian of our homeowners association's delicate sensibilities. Mid-50s, hair lacquered into a helmet that could probably withstand a minor earthquake, and a permanent expression that suggested she'd just discovered a rogue dandelion on her meticulously weeded lawn. Brenda viewed the natural world with suspicion, if not outright hostility. Squirrels were vermin, dandelions were anarchy, and my bees were an existential threat to her perfectly symmetrical world. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth a pleasant contrast to the cool morning air, and my gaze drifted to the crumpled piece of paper at the bottom of my trash can. Yesterday's final courtesy notice from the HOA. The words unauthorized agricultural installations and harboring of aggressive fauna were still burned into my memory, underlined and bolded with the kind of manic energy only a truly committed suburban busybody could muster. I'd used it to light the smoker later that afternoon, the acrid puff a small act of defiance. I knew this was coming. Brenda had been circling the hives like a particularly grumpy vulture for months, but I hadn't anticipated just how spectacularly she planned to crash the party. The digital battlefield had been established weeks ago, a passive-aggressive volley of electrons that had escalated with alarming speed. It had all started innocently enough, a bland, official HOA email from Brenda's meticulously crafted HOA president address. Brenda's email, week ago Tuesday, 9:17 a.m. Dear Mr. Davies, it has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association Board that the presence of your bee enclosures on your property, bordering the community green space, constitutes a violation of neighborhood covenants. Specifically, we refer to Section 11, Paragraph C, which clearly prohibits the harboring of non-domesticated animals within community limits. Please ensure the immediate removal of these unauthorized structures and their associated inhabitants within 72 hours to avoid further action. Sincerely, Brenda Henderson, HOA President. My first response was polite, bordering on patronizingly helpful. Leo's reply, week ago, Tuesday, 10:03 a.m. Hi, Brenda. Thanks for reaching out. I appreciate you flagging this. However, I think there might be a slight misunderstanding regarding the neighborhood covenants. I actually presented a detailed proposal for the establishment of these beehives at the HOA meeting on May 15th of this year, and the minutes, attached for your convenience, see item 3B, clearly indicate approval by a majority vote. Also, just for clarity, in the state of insert fictional U.S. state name here, honeybees, Apis mellifera, are classified as agricultural livestock insects, not non-domesticated animals in the way, say, a pet raccoon might be. I've attached a link to the relevant state agricultural code for your reference. To ensure complete transparency, I've also CC'd the rest of the HOA board and my attorney, Miss Evans, on this email. Best, Leo Davies. That's when the gloves came off, metaphorically speaking. Brenda's replies became increasingly unhinged, each one a masterclass in suburban indignation. Brenda's reply. Week ago, Tuesday, 11:48 a.m. Mr. Davies, the minutes you refer to are subject to interpretation. Furthermore, the potential danger these stinging insects pose to our residents, particularly children and those with allergies, far outweighs any purported benefits to your garden. I personally witnessed one of your bees behaving in a distinctly aggressive manner near my prize-winning petunias yesterday. It was hovering menacingly. This is simply unacceptable. We will not have our property values diminished by your hippy-dippy insect farm. The emails continued in this vein for days. She accused me of everything from attracting bears, despite living in a decidedly non-bear-prone suburb, to single-handedly causing the local mosquito population to explode, a scientific impossibility I tried and failed to explain. Her arguments devolved into pure emotional reasoning, peppered with exclamation points and capital letters. The final email, the one I'd found taped to my door, was the pièce de résistance. Brenda's final warning. Yesterday, 6:32 p.m. Mr. Davies, you have ignored all reasonable requests and continue to flout community standards. Let me be perfectly clear. If you do not handle this situation immediately and remove those abominable hives, then I will be forced to take measures to protect our residents and the integrity of our community. Consider this your final warning. That was it. The gauntlet had been thrown down. She'd gone full Karen, and I, Leo Davies, armed with a smartphone, a healthy dose of sarcasm, and the direct line to the state apiarist, was ready to pick it up. I stared at that last email, the digital equivalent of a toddler's tantrum in bold font. Protect the residents? The only thing Brenda was protecting was her meticulously curated delusion of suburban perfection. I put down my lukewarm coffee and reached for my phone. It was time to escalate. My fingers hovered over Dr. Aris Thorne's number. We'd met at a state beekeepers conference a few months back. He was surprisingly down-to-earth for a guy whose business cards literally said state apiarist. We'd bonded over our shared frustration with people who thought honeybees were inherently aggressive killing machines. I took a deep breath and hit dial. Dr. Thorne? Leo Davies here. Yeah, from the conference back in April. Listen, I think my neighbor is finally going to do it. She's been threatening the community beehives for months. The HOA president, a real piece of work. Yes, the ones we registered with the Pollinator Pathway program. Got all the paperwork. Yeah, she's escalated from strongly worded emails to, well, let's just say her latest missive sounds less like a complaint and more like a declaration of war on my apiary. I have her on email, and frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if she tries something drastic. Yes, exactly. That's why I'm calling. I have a feeling you might want to witness this firsthand, especially given her unique interpretation of community standards. What are you doing tomorrow morning around, say, 9 a.m.? I'll have fresh coffee and scones. Consider it an intervention." The conversation was brief but productive. Dr. Thorne, it turned out, had dealt with his fair share of overzealous HOA presidents. He agreed to swing by, intrigued by the sheer audacity of the situation. Next, Operation Surveillance was a go. I'd been thinking about getting a better security camera anyway. Now I had the perfect excuse. A quick trip to the local tech store resulted in a sleek, high-definition 4K camera with crystal-clear audio recording capabilities. Back home, I disguised it inside an oversized birdhouse, strategically positioning it on a tree branch with a perfect, unobstructed view of the beehives. The lens peered out innocently, ready to capture Brenda's descent into suburban madness. That evening, I spent an hour watching the live feed on my phone. The bees were settling in for the night, a gentle hum emanating from the wooden boxes. I zoomed in on a single worker bee meticulously cleaning a honeycomb cell. They were so focused, so industrious, so utterly oblivious to the storm brewing. A pang of guilt hit me. I was using them as bait in my ridiculous suburban drama, but they were also the victims here. And I vowed, as I drifted off to sleep to the soothing buzz on the monitor, that I would get them justice. The next morning, I was perched at my kitchen window, phone in hand, the live feed from the Birdhouse, my personal reality TV show. It was 8:58 a.m. My narration was pure sports commentator. "And here she comes, folks, waddling down the sidewalk like a disgruntled penguin in a plastic bag. It's Brenda Henderson, the reigning queen of suburban spite, and she is accessorized. I repeat, accessorized." Brenda was indeed a sight to behold. She was encased in a full, bright yellow rain poncho, despite the clear, sunny skies. Her hands were shoved into industrial-strength yellow dishwashing gloves, and perched precariously on her lacquered hair was a beekeeper's veil that looked suspiciously like it belonged to a child's Halloween costume. She clutched a can of wasp spray in one hand and a rusty, long-handled garden rake in the other. The sheer absurdity of her getup almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. "She's approaching the target now, folks, moving with the stealth of a rhinoceros in a tutu," I whispered to myself, narrating the scene unfolding on my screen. "The wasp spray is out. Oh dear. That's like trying to stop a Sherman tank with a squirt gun. The bees are probably more annoyed by the cheap chemical scent than actually threatened." Brenda sprayed the entrance of Hive Alpha in short, panicked bursts. The bees, predictably, reacted with confused curiosity more than aggression. A few buzzed out to investigate the strange smell. Then, the rake came into play. "And here we go. The melee weapon has been deployed. It's a vintage model. Looks like it's seen better days. Oh, the humanity. She's swinging. First contact. We have wood splintering. Honeycombs are airborne. This is a 5-alarm bee emergency." The image on my phone screen was chaotic. Frames were being knocked askew, honeycombs were crashing to the ground, and a furious, desperate buzzing filled the air, even through my phone's speakers. It was brutal. It was unnecessary. It was Brenda at her most Brenda. The moment the rake connected with the first hive, my fingers were already flying across my phone. First call to 911. "Yes, I'd like to report the active destruction of private property and agricultural assets at 123 Maple Lane. The perpetrator is on site now. Yes, she's armed, with a garden rake and a can of wasp spray. No, I'm not joking. It's the Homeowners Association president. Yes, she's attacking my beehives. Please hurry." Second call to Dr. Thorne. "Aris, it's go time. Operation Honey Justice is officially underway. She's a vision in yellow vinyl. The rake has been deployed with extreme prejudice. Casualties are, significant. See you in 5. And bring your A-game." I pocketed my phone, took a deep breath, and walked out my back door. I tried to project an aura of calm, though inside a mixture of fury and a strange sense of surreal detachment was swirling. Brenda stood amidst the wreckage, panting, her ridiculous veil askew, the rake still clutched in her gloved hand. She looked triumphant. "I warned you, Leo," she wheezed, her voice muffled by the mosquito netting. "I'm protecting this community from your infestation." I kept my voice level, my phone still recording in my pocket. "From what, Brenda? Delicious honey? Thriving gardens? A healthy ecosystem? You do realize what you've just done, right?" She puffed out her chest, looking utterly convinced of her righteousness. "I've solved a problem. You should be thanking me." 2 minutes and 45 seconds, I muttered, checking my watch with a grim satisfaction. New record. Just as Brenda was launching into another tirade about the hazards my bees posed, a pristine white pickup truck emblazoned with the official seal of the State Department of Agriculture pulled up to the curb. Dr. Apiarist Thorne stepped out. He was exactly as I remembered him, sharp, professional, wearing a crisp polo shirt and khakis, a serious-looking clipboard tucked under his arm. He looked more like a very efficient accountant than the cavalry, but I knew better. He completely ignored Brenda, who was now gaping at his arrival, and walked straight towards me, his expression a mixture of concern and professional curiosity. "Leo, good morning. She actually used a rake?" His voice was calm, almost clinical. "And wasp spray," I added, gesturing to the discarded can lying amidst the broken frames. "The cheap stuff, too. Probably won't even kill them, just make them really angry." Before Brenda could fully process this new development, a police cruiser, lights flashing silently, rolled up behind Dr. Thorne's truck. Officer Miller, a middle-aged man with the weary-eyed of someone who'd seen it all, mostly domestic disputes and parking violations, and Officer Davis, his younger, more eager partner, emerged from the vehicle. They took in the scene: the destroyed apiary, the woman in the bizarre yellow getup, the calm homeowner, and the official-looking guy with the clipboard, and their expressions were priceless. Pure, unadulterated confusion. Brenda, however, was recovering quickly. Her initial shock was morphing back into righteous indignation. She marched over to the officers, her voice shrill. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man has been endangering our neighborhood with these attack insects. I had to take matters into my own hands." Officer Miller, his gaze flickering between the wreckage and Brenda's outlandish attire, turned to me, his tone neutral and, "Sir, can you tell me what's going on here?" "Certainly, officer," I replied calmly, gesturing towards the scene. This woman, Brenda, just deliberately and systematically destroyed several $1,000s worth of my personal property, which also happens to be a registered agricultural project under the protection of the state. But don't just take my word for it. I gestured towards Dr. Thorne. "This is Dr. Apiarist Thorne. He's the state apiarist. I believe he has a thing or two to say about the matter." The camera, if there were one, would have zoomed in on Brenda's face at that moment. Her smug expression crumpled like a week-old pastry. Her skin, already pale beneath the yellow poncho, seemed to lose all remaining color. The two police officers turned in unison to face Dr. Thorne, who cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at Officer Miller. The reckoning had begun. Dr. Thorne knelt beside the shattered remains of Hive Alpha, his professional demeanor now bordering on that of a forensic investigator examining a crime scene. He didn't so much as glance at Brenda, addressing his remarks directly to the two police officers. His voice was measured, his language precise, peppered with technical terms that sounded both authoritative and vaguely terrifying. "Officer," he began, his gaze focused on a broken frame dripping with honey, "what we have here is significantly more than simple property damage. As per State Agricultural Code 3, Section 2B, a registered honeybee colony is legally classified as livestock. The deliberate destruction of such a colony is a Class A misdemeanor, comparable in severity to, say, the intentional harm or killing of someone's domestic animals, their dog, their cat, even their prize-winning show pig. He carefully picked up a piece of broken honeycomb, revealing the mangled remains of queen cells. Furthermore, he continued, his tone hardening slightly, these hives were registered under the State Pollinator Pathway Initiative, a program designed to support crucial pollinator populations. Miss Henderson's actions could be interpreted as a direct interference with a state-sponsored environmental program, which carries its own set of significant civil penalties. We're talking potential fines that could easily reach into the 5-figure range, per hive. Brenda finally found her voice, a strangled squawk of indignation. But they're just bugs! They could have stung someone. It was a safety hazard. Dr. Thorne finally turned his gaze towards her, his expression devoid of any warmth. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through her protests, "in the last 5 years, this state has recorded 0 fatalities directly attributable to honeybee stings. We've had 12 reported injuries from falling coconuts at the annual state fair during that same period. Were you planning to launch a preemptive strike on the palm trees next? Your actions were demonstrably not about safety. They were about a profound lack of understanding and, frankly, a considerable amount of misguided enthusiasm." He then pointed to the discarded can of wasp spray. "And might I add, ma'am, the use of this unregistered pesticide in a manner inconsistent with its labeling is a direct violation of federal EPA regulations. We can certainly add that to the growing list of infractions." As Brenda sputtered, trying to formulate a coherent defense that likely involved phrases like property values and think of the children, I decided to add my 2 cents. "Oh, and officer," I interjected, pulling my phone out of my pocket, "I have the entire incident on crystal clear 4K video, with audio." I queued up the clip and played the segment where Brenda, looking like a deranged beekeeper from a low-budget horror film, ranted about my insect infestation as she swung the rake with gusto. Officer Miller's weary expression slowly shifted to one of dawning realization that his Tuesday morning was about to get significantly more complicated and possibly slightly more entertaining. Officer Miller let out a long, drawn-out sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose as if trying to ward off a headache. He looked from the destroyed hives to Dr. Thorne's stern face, then back to Brenda, who was now looking considerably less triumphant and a whole lot more panicked. The video playing on my phone, with Brenda's increasingly unhinged commentary echoing in the morning air, wasn't exactly helping her case. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice now firm and official, "based on the evidence presented here, the physical damage, the expert testimony from Dr. Thorne, and this video recording, I'm going to have to ask you to come down to the station with us to provide a formal statement." He reached for his handcuffs. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The transformation in Brenda was dramatic. The bluster evaporated, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. "Wait, what? I'm the victim here. These creatures were a menace." Officer Davis, the younger officer, looked like he was trying very hard to suppress a grin. He stepped forward and gently but firmly guided Brenda's hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet suburban morning. Neighbors, drawn by the flashing lights and the unusual commotion, were now starting to peek out from behind their curtains and cautiously venture onto their porches. The sight of Brenda Henderson, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, being led away in handcuffs over a pile of shattered beehives was a moment that would be etched in neighborhood lore for years to come. As Officer Davis escorted a protesting Brenda towards the police cruiser, her muffled cries of, "But the bylaws!" and Think of the property values. Floating in the air, Dr. Thorne simply shook his head, a slight smile playing on his lips. He clicked his pen and continued making notes on his clipboard, occasionally muttering something about unprecedented levels of suburban wildlife conflict. Officer Miller paused briefly before getting into his car. "Mr. Davies," he said, his expression still weary but with a hint of amusement. "I have a feeling we haven't heard the last of this." "Oh, I'm sure you haven't, officer," I replied, watching Brenda's increasingly agitated figure disappear into the back of the cruiser. "But I have a feeling the next chapter will be considerably less destructive." The aftermath of the Great Beehive Massacre of '24, as it was quickly dubbed by the neighborhood text chain, was interesting. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages of support from neighbors, ranging from heartfelt apologies for Brenda's behavior to offers of help with the cleanup. Even Mrs. Gable, the owner of the yappy Pomeranian, sent a surprisingly sympathetic text with a bee emoji. The HOA vice president, a mild-mannered accountant named Arthur, called me later that day, his voice a nervous tremor. He stammered apologies, assured me that the board was deeply concerned by Brenda's actions, and asked what they could do to rectify the situation. I told him that a sincere apology and a commitment to not interfering with my beekeeping activities in the future would be a good start. And maybe a small donation to a bee conservation charity. I knew I wanted to rebuild, and I wanted to rebuild better. I needed more secure hives, perhaps in a more protected location. That's when I called Mike and Dave, a local contractor duo known for their solid work and their even more solid senses of humor. They arrived the next morning, surveying the scene of devastation with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "So," Mike, the burly one with a ZZ Top-esque beard, said, scratching his chin, "let me get this straight. The HOA lady, she attacked your bees? With a rake?" "And wasp spray," I clarified. "Don't forget the wasp spray. Apparently they were menacing her petunias." Dave, the taller, leaner of the two, wiped a tear of laughter from his eye. "Man, we've built decks for people who hate their neighbors' landscaping, but this is a whole new level of suburban warfare. This is art." "So, you guys interested in rebuilding?" I asked, trying to keep a straight face. Mike and Dave exchanged a look, then grinned. "Are you kidding? We wouldn't miss this for the world. We'll build you the Fort Knox of apiaries, something Brenda Henderson will look at and weep bitter pesticidal tears." Dave chimed in, "We'll even give you a discount. Call it the Auntie Karen discount." Their enthusiasm was infectious. Mike suggested a community build day. "Get everyone involved, show Brenda and the rest of the neighborhood that you've got support." The idea took off like a swarm in springtime. A GoFundMe page titled Re-Bee the Community was started by a neighbor and smashed its initial fundraising goal within hours. Mike and Dave became unofficial consultants, helping me design a new, more robust apiary that would be both functional and a visual asset to the community green space, a permanent, buzzing monument to the defeat of suburban tyranny. The emergency HOA meeting was called a week later. The community hall was packed. You could feel the tension in the air thick enough to spread on toast. Brenda was there, out on bail, looking pale and defiant, flanked by a grim-faced lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Poor Arthur, the vice president, looked like he was about to have an anxiety attack. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't engage in petty arguments. I simply presented the facts. I played the security camera footage on the large projector, the image of Brenda's rampage playing out in stark 4K clarity. A collective gasp went through the room as she swung the rake. Then, I outlined the legal ramifications, reading excerpts from Dr. Thorne's official report, detailing the Class A misdemeanor charge, the potential federal EPA violations, and the significant civil penalties Brenda was facing. I then turned to the HOA's lawyer and presented him with a preliminary estimate of my damages, the cost of the destroyed hives, the lost honey production, and perhaps most importantly, the punitive damages for the emotional distress caused by Brenda's senseless act of aggression. I also mentioned the letter I'd received from the HOA's insurance carrier, indicating a rather substantial increase in their liability premiums in light of recent events. The numbers on the screen spoke volumes. Then, the floor opened, and neighbor after neighbor stood up to voice their support for me and their utter condemnation of Brenda's actions. Mr. Henderson spoke eloquently about the revitalization of his roses. The community garden manager recounted the record harvests since the bees arrived. Even Mrs. Gable admitted that her Pomeranian seemed calmer with the gentle buzzing in the air. The HOA treasurer presented a grim financial forecast, highlighting the potential legal fees the association now faced due to Brenda's solo act of vandalism. The inevitable motion was made for Brenda's immediate removal as president and her expulsion from the HOA board. The vote was almost unanimous. As the results were announced, Brenda finally cracked. She stood up, her face contorted with rage, and launched into a tirade about ungrateful neighbors and the importance of properly manicured lawns. As she stormed out of the community hall, a few of the neighborhood kids, emboldened by the collective shift in power, started making buzzing noises. It was a small, childish act of rebellion, but it felt like a significant victory. A month later, the air was filled with a different kind of buzz. The happy chatter of neighbors, the sizzle of barbecue on the grill, and the contented hum of thousands of healthy bees. The community was celebrating the grand unveiling of the new apiary. Mike and Dave had outdone themselves. The new hives were housed in a beautiful, sturdy cedar and stone structure, complete with an educational plaque explaining the importance of pollinators and a plexiglass observation window where kids pressed their faces, wide-eyed with wonder. Dr. Thorne himself had come to deliver 3 new, thriving colonies, carefully selected for their gentle temperament and honey-producing prowess. He even gave an impromptu, fascinating lesson on bee behavior and the crucial role they play in our ecosystem. Mike and Dave were manning the grill, regaling everyone with increasingly exaggerated and hilarious tales of the Great Beehive Siege. As for Brenda, well, justice had been served. She was forced to pay substantial fines and restitution, covering the cost of the destroyed hives and the initial estimate of lost honey production. The judge also mandated anger management courses and, somewhat ironically, an online environmental awareness class. Her house, a monument to beige conformity, was now listed for sale. Later that afternoon, as the celebration wound down, the new HOA president, a kind, sensible woman named Sarah, came over to me with a small, beautifully labeled jar. "Leo," she said, smiling, "the first batch from the new hives. We thought you should have it." The label read, "Community Justice Honey, sweetened by cooperation." I sat on my porch as the sun began to set, watching the neighborhood kids still fascinated by the bees buzzing behind the observation window. Dr. Thorne was chatting with a group of interested adults, pointing out the different castes of bees. Mike and Dave were packing up their tools, already brainstorming ideas for future community projects. Sarah waved goodbye as she headed back to her own yard. I unscrewed the lid of the honey jar. The aroma was rich and floral, a testament to the resilience of nature and the strength of community. I dipped my finger in and tasted it. "They say revenge is a dish best served cold," I murmured to myself, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I disagree. I think it's best served warm, on a buttery scone, drizzled with the very thing you were trying to protect. I took a larger taste. And it is, without a doubt, the sweetest thing I've ever tasted. The low hum of the bees, a sound that had almost become a casualty of suburban madness, filled the peaceful evening air. They were home. And so was the sweet taste of victory.